Hello, welcome back to my network. I'm with Christopher Eccleston, the CEO of Molten Metals. Christopher, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Just kick things off, brief company overview.
Okay, Molten Metals Corp is listed on the CSE in Canada with the ticker MOLT, M-O-L-T, and it's been listed since August of this year. The company is dedicated to the production of antimony, and by production I mean production, not just looking for it, because we know where it is, but also getting some out to the market because the price has been strong in the last 2 years, and we want to take advantage of that. And there's hardly any production of antimony outside China, so we want to fill that gap. Everyone's talking about critical metals, strategic metals, and it definitely ticks those boxes.
Good. Okay, before we get into that, what's your capital structure looking like?
Capital structure is nearly 17 million shares on issue, of which the largest block is held by myself and my business partner. Between her and myself and our various corporate vehicles, we control around 5 million shares. So 5 out of 17, you can do the math on that, it's like 30%. It's pretty tight share structure besides that, because many of the investors beyond that, because we didn't do an IPO, are actually people that we know. So it's really tight, which means not an enormous amount of liquidity, but it's improving. And as news gets out there, presumably that will attract more people in. Higher the price goes, the more tempted people might be to release some stock. But at the moment, no one seems to be a seller. So I'm pretty happy with that situation.
No, good. Okay, I want to change the order of the interview to what we usually do, because antimony is a market that most people haven't looked at or don't understand. So you're obviously, before you even joined this company, was one of the leading researchers on antimony.
Yes.
Perhaps you can just give us an overview of the market, what its use is, its demand, supply, sort of what the annual production rates are around the world.
Cool, yeah. So antimony is around 170,000 tonnes a year. While it may not be a metal that you've particularly heard about, it's half the size of the tin market. And everybody's heard of tin. So it's quite interesting that it is so large and yet so relatively invisible. It doesn't have public market, and spot prices are only known really to the trade. So there's no trading on the LME or any of the other exchanges around. So it's a relative subject of mystery. But it is a big component of our daily lives, particularly in two aspects. One is fire retardants. So while you don't see fire retardants in your daily life, they're in textiles, they're in building materials, they're all around you really. And people don't notice that it's there, but the largest proportion of antimony is in those. So around 65% of all usage goes to those. Then you have lead acid batteries, which of course have been with us for over 100 years now as part of the automobile industry, but around 15% also goes to those. But interestingly, the only part of their antimony sort of complex that is recycled is the lead acid batteries. So most of the rest of antimony that goes into these fire retardants is never actually recyclable, or is it recycled? Because it's just impossible to do so. You can't recycle textiles, for instance, in the same way you can recycle a battery. And then there are other usages in ammunition. Traditionally, interest and demand for antimony and prices have spiked during wars. So like the First World War, Second World War, Korean War, you see these big rises in demand and in activity in the market and in prices. And still antimony is used massively in ammunition, particularly as an alloy with lead. So because it makes lead hard, and so that's one of the few metals that does make lead hard. So that's how it works out there. And then the new upcoming usage is in antimony molten salt batteries. So far, making virtually no impact on the demand. But if molten salt batteries start to get traction, and they're a mass storage device, they're not for EVs, I should stress that. They're more for instance, solar arrays, wind farms. You take the power off when you've got either the sun shining or the wind blowing, and then you store it to release it when the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing. And this new usage is not a recent invention, dates back to the 1940s, but it's starting to get traction now. So we may be seeing a lot more demand from that space. And frankly, as the largest producer outside of China is only producing 3,000 tonnes per annum out of the 170,000 tonnes, there is hardly any large-scale production outside China. And so there's a need for that. China is actually has dominated the antimony space for hundreds of years. But what's happened is that the Chinese have overexploited their resource. The supply from Chinese mines has been steadily decreasing. And so the Chinese have filled that gap by going to countries in the developing world, whether they be Laos, Burma, Honduras, Bolivia, and picking up material from largely artisanal miners and then bringing it back to the mothership where they process it. So it still looks like China is the largest producer of antimony, but in fact it's the largest processor. The production is steadily decreasing, and so there is a need for more antimony to be discovered outside of China. And many end users now, particularly say the US military in the ammunition area, do not want to have a product that's sourced from China. So they want to have non-Chinese antimony. Now, there's no way that you can tell, 1 kilo ingot of antimony that's Chinese versus non-Chinese, but these end users now want to have proof that there is a supply chain that doesn't actually touch China. And antimony does now have critical metal status, and in fact it's the only metal that is on all 5 of the major critical metal lists that are around, whether it's US government, EU, UK, Japan, Australia, even India have antimony on their list of critical metals. And very few other metals actually, manage to score on all five lists.
So moving back to Molten Metals then,
Yep.
Obviously your tag phrase of the company is leading with production.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Production, production, production. I perceive that the markets at the moment want to see companies that are producing. We go through constantly in the mining market through these phases where people say exploration is the most important, so you've got a future supply. The crisis in antimony and many other critical and strategic metals is now. It's not in 5 years that we need the metal. We need it now. And you can see that reflected in the price surges of many metals, but most particularly in lithium at the moment and in antimony. Antimony 2 years ago was $5,500 a tonne, and you couldn't virtually give it away. Now the price is over $13,000 a tonne, and briefly earlier this year was as high as $14,000. There is a need for the product, and it cannot be supplied. So coming up with plans where you spend endless time drilling, and then you do PEAs, and then you do more PEAs and more resources, and then back to another PEA, and then on to a PFS. What good is that going to do when really the market needs the product now? And so our goal is particularly to move straight to production. Now, that is not easier said than done if you don't actually already have resources identified. But in our case, for instance, we've got two major areas of interest. One is West Gore, which is in Nova Scotia, where we've optioned the largest former producing mine of antimony in Canada. But more importantly, in Slovakia, in Central Europe, we have accumulated 3 assets, 2 of them in antimony and 1 of them in tin, tin being another critical metal. All 3 of those assets in Slovakia all have existing mine infrastructure, so they have old exploration adits that have been constructed in the Soviet era days. But moreover, they have resources upon the underground assets that have not been exploited. So our goal is to actually move them into production pretty fast. We don't feel any need, compunction, or any other reason that we should spend a lot of time exploring when enormous amounts of work was done by the geologists back in the the days of socialist domination of Eastern Europe. And why reinvent the wheel? Why spend any money on exploration if it's already been done? People say, well, don't you have a PEA? Don't you have a resource report? I said, yeah, we've got 300-page reports on some of these resources. They're all in Slovak, but we've got them, and we're not going to deliver them to the Canadian Stock Exchange because, what can they do with them? So, but we know what they say. And we know that the resources are there, and we know that the work's been done. I mean, these people had no particular, market reason to come up with these reports. They came up with the assessment of resources there because it was a state diktat in the days of the communist government that you needed to know where your resources were for future usage. And they did. And then they were largely forgotten about. And we've come back now to these forgotten resources with all this voluminous work, drilling, exploratory adits, and we figured, hey, we can pick these up for a relatively small amount of money and get them into production again.
Well, you haven't released the reports, but could you tell us what the reports say? How much antimony?
All of them, I can't, off the top of my head, relay what the reports say, but they have been in the press releases that we've published as we've accumulated these assets. And they range up to one of the deposits, the Trojerova deposit, which is around 15 kilometres from Bratislava, the capital, has a resource of over 45,000 tonnes of contained antimony, which at current prices is worth around $600 million. And so it's just really sitting there. And there has been no production of antimony in Europe since the early 1990s, which is when the mines in Slovakia were closed, not the mines that we've got. These mines were not operating then in the early 90s. The other mines were shut down, and Europe has not produced any antimony since then. So, the EU has this goal of circular economy, and all sounds very sexy, etc. But you need to have something to begin with to go round in a circle. If you've got nothing to begin with, you can't go around in a circle. And as I mentioned before, antimony is largely unrecyclable, except for the lead-acid batteries. So it means that the EU needs a constant supply of new antimony, and it has none. So we intend to fill that void there. And with the tin as well, if we get the tin going, we will be the first producer of mined tin in Europe. At the moment, there's some recycling of old dumps in Spain, but there's no primary production of tin in Europe. So that's another gap that we want to fill.
What do these deposits look like in terms of when you're saying production?
Yeah.
How are you going to be producing them? Are they open pit deposits? Are they already
they're
underground?
all underground.
Is there the infrastructure already there in place? Can you just give us a bit more flavour as to how this is going to work?
It differs. In the case of the tin mine, it has 5.3 kilometres of exploration adits. We need to reopen those adits. At the moment, we're reopening one of the antimony adits first, the smallest one, which is at a place called Tienesgrund in central Slovakia. But if in the case of Trojerova, which is the one near Bratislava, it has phenomenal infrastructure. It has 700 metres of exploration adits that are all propped with iron frames going virtually to the resource. We just need to extend the adit a short way, and then we'll be into the resource, and we'll be able to start, churning out product from there, which has excited many of the off-takers and the traders in the space, because there is this sort of desperation for new sources of product. And the thing that surprised us is since our listing and since the jungle drums have been talking a bit about what we've been doing in Central Europe, we've even had Chinese companies coming to us, much to my amazement. Certainly, it would not fit very well into the circular economy argument for us to be selling European antimony to the Chinese, but the Chinese are definitely enthusiastic.
Okay. What is the timeline here? So,
our timeline is that we're actually reopening the Tienesgrund adit as we speak. Hopefully, during the winter, we will start work on reopening the tin adit. And Trojerova, we don't need to even reopen it. What we do need to do there is we need to raise more money if we want to do that. But at the moment, we're just focusing on the low-hanging fruit in the form of the Tienesgrund antimony mine and the Bear Creek, as it's called, the tin mine.
But you must need production facilities. There must be.
Right, yeah.
Tell us about
exactly. What we're doing at the moment is we've acquired a whole processing circuit for antimony, which surprisingly enough, antimony, tin and tungsten all have the same type of processing facility, as a circuit. So what we've done is we've also we've rented an enormous past facility for quartz production, because quartz was a big industry in the Soviet days. And that facility is being refurbished as we speak. All this equipment that we have is going to be moved into it. And then hopefully over the winter, we will start doing processing of some stockpiles that we brought from the Tennisgrund mine, where they were outside the mine. They were left from the 1950s. No, they're not tailings, because that mine was only ever an exploratory mine. So what they did was they got to the resource, they measured the resource, and then in the process, they dumped a whole lot of antimony ore outside the mine. We're going to be processing that first. Then as we reopen the underground mine, we're going to be getting into the resource area, and hopefully getting some of that out and then sending that to our facility as well, so that we can, deliver to the market a product, because nothing, succeeds like success, and nothing succeeds like delivery of an ingot or antimony trioxide, which is more like a powder, than actually doing it. And that's what we plan on doing. Too many companies talk about production as if it's, some unachievable goal. We feel it's very achievable, and we want to do it in the, ASAP.
Yeah. With the production facility as it stands, obviously you're building that at the moment. That's due early next year, is it?
We're not building it, we're just refurbishing it. It's all there. It needed a new roof on it, and it needed some, refurbishment inside, new electricals and everything like that. But it's a gigantic sort of production hall where they used to be doing exactly the same thing. There's even mountings for a ball mill there. So we've got our new ball mill, relatively new, that we bought, and we're going to just be moving it in and putting it in where there's been nothing since really the 1990s.
What's the design capacity of what you could be producing, say you're fully up?
At that facility, the ball mill is like the deciding factor on how the rest of the circuit works, and its capacity is like 7 to 15 tons per day. So that's more than enough for our purposes, because the antimony, samples that we've taken there from the dumps, which were reported in the market, were all largely above 35% antimony. So there'll be smaller amounts as well, but the goal is we don't have to process that many tons to start producing money.
Okay. And what are you actually producing? You were saying a concentrate that you're
going to be plan on producing concentrate, because that concentrate can either be sent to Kosovo for smelting, or it can be sent to Turkey, or it can be sent to Oman. There are other places farther afield. If the Chinese want it, it's a long way to send it, but that's up to them.
Okay. What I find quite surprising is that you haven't released any economics around this. Like you said, you've sort of bypassed that. You've already got the reports. You want to just go straight into production.
One of the factors here is that you see that even the most basic PEA could cost you up to $1 million. Our whole circuit that we bought, without revealing how much it cost a mere fraction of that. The refurbishment of the facility is costing us a mere fraction of that. And the reopening of the mine is costing us a mere fraction of that. We can either have a report that thick that's going to cost us $1 million, or we could be producing for less. What do you want?
I'd rather production as well. But the only thing with the report is obviously it gives confidence to investors that what is there, right?
Yes, yeah. But then they could be waiting 10 years to actually see any production.
Agreed. When can we expect production?
I'm hoping that over the winter we'll start to see a flow of product out of there. How much it will be, I don't know, because it depends on weather and factors like that. At the moment we're racing against the winter to get our facility with a new roof on it. It's got a good roof on it already, but we want a better roof. And then get the equipment into it, and hopefully get the Tennisgrund adit reopened. That's underway at the moment, has been since Wednesday of last week. And so, looking forward to sooner rather than later. Let's put it that way.
So you get into production. How are you working out, obviously, without doing the studies, how are you working out what the all-in sustaining cost might be and how profitable this might be before you actually go into production?
As we know from many in the mining industry, the all-in sustaining cost is, no matter how much goes into the calculation, it's quite frequently comes out as something totally different in the wash. In our case, we're keeping our costs as low as possible, and we figure that at 13,000 a tonne, if we can be producing at 5,000 a tonne or less, we will then be profitable even at the low prices that reigned 2 years ago. Because in this case, for instance, when we're reprocessing dumps or whatever, we're not having a mining cost. We're not having to build the adits in the case of the tin mine or in the case of Troja Rova. In the case of Tennisgood, we're having to reopen the adit, but the amount that it's costing is like shockingly low. And I'm just sort of like, in the refurbishment of the facility, for instance, I came up with a budget of what I expected all these things would cost in euros. And so far, everything except one of the items that I've got there is coming massively under. In this day and age, do you ever hear of costs coming in massively under anything?
No, with the 13,000, is that the ingot cost? What's the actual, price? What's the price of the concentrate that you'll be producing?
That's an interesting question. Many people in the industry who want concentrates talk about a 30% discount, say, to the price, because it depends where you send it. You see, if you send it a near distance to, say, Kosovo to be smelted, or in the case of the tin, we can send it just to Poland, really only like 150 kilometres. But to Kosovo, a bit further, to Turkey further, to Oman, quite a lot further, that then brings in a shipping cost. So the nearer we send it, the less shipping costs there'll be. Because basically when you're sending a 60% concentrate, 40% of it is basically a waste. That's going to end up in the tailings somewhere, but at least the tailings won't be where our facility is, so which also helps.
And how do you negotiate offtakes for this? Is that with the smelters themselves, or is there an end user?
Either. We've been besieged by the smelters and by the end users, plus also by the traders, because the traders interact beyond the end product. The two products that are produced are either metal ingots, or the largest product is the SPO3, which is antimony trioxide, which is used in the plastic master batches and textile master batches for the fire retardants. Those are largely dealt with by traders, and they're sold on to the myriad of users that take those products and mix them into their industrial processes.
When so you're processing the dump to begin with. I think what I'm trying to get my head around at the moment is you'll be processing from that material first, but then you've also got the 45,000 tons in the ground.
That's further down the track, the 45,000.
Exactly.
Because we're reopening an adit at the moment. There is actually a resource in there at the moment that dates back to the 1950s, where they identified the resource, they added it to the country's, that case, Czechoslovakia's mineral inventory, as they called it, and then they closed the mine. They didn't actually operate it because they had much larger mines in those days. They had Dubrava, they had Pezinok. These were large antimony mines that made Slovakia the largest producer in Europe. So they essentially identified resources all around the country in all sorts of different metals, and then they closed the mines, closed the exploratory mines, because they just said, okay, well, when we need it, we'll come back to it. And of course, largely it was forgotten with the fall of the wall, except we have a geo who's a Slovak geo who's been around since, the dawn of time, and he knows exactly where all these bodies are buried. And he said to me, well, what do you want? And I said, well, we want antimony. So I know where that is. And then we said, well, he said, what else do you want? And I said, well, we're also very interested in tin. He said, I know of a tin asset with a resource. And so we've got really 3 mines with resources already identified. So, why bother reinventing the wheel if you've actually got it all at your disposal there?
Okay, so the thing I was trying to get my head around was obviously you enter production, you start producing from the dump.
Yeah.
But when can you really give realistic guidance on what the profit margins might be or the cash flow? Because obviously the dump material might be different economics to the resource, right?
Yep, no, exactly.
And so how long are you anticipating to be processing the dump material before you actually move on to the
our
resource?
market cap is so low at 4.5 million that if we were to get, say, Troyerova into operation at 5,000 tonnes per annum, you can just do the maths on that. It makes the current market cap look derisory. But I don't want to make any speculation or forward-looking statements on what would the potential revenues be because we don't have a PEA. Yeah. It's really just going to be a case of watch for our announcements, watch for the volumes that we're selling, and that will hopefully give an indication of what's happening to our bottom line.
Good. Okay. And just to finish things off, what are we looking at over the next 12 months? What are the key milestones that should attract value?
Key thing in the short term is actually the reopening of the Tennis Granite, the finishing of the processing facility, and then starting operations, starting the operation of the reopening the tin mine. That's sort of like a winter project from here through to April. And then Troyerova. Troyerova is a case of really big potential supply. Not a disruptive supply. When we're talking about 170,000 tonne market, to add 5,000 tonnes per annum to that market is not going to break the camel's back or anything like that, but it's going to definitely make us the largest producer outside China, should that happen.
Brilliant. Christopher, thank you for your time.
Good. Thank you very much.